The thermal regulator in section C7 was making that noise again, a rhythmic wheeze that sounded like an asthmatic robot trying to whistle. I pressed my ear against the cool metal housing, listening to the mechanical symphony that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. 3 short wheezes, 1 long groan, then silence for exactly 4 seconds before the cycle repeated. At least something in this universe was predictable. "Benny, you down there playing doctor with the heating vents again?" Rodriguez's voice crackled through my comm unit, filled with the kind of amusement that suggested he'd caught me talking to machinery more than once. Which, to be fair, he had. "The diagnostic says everything's nominal, but she's clearly lying," I muttered into the comm, running my fingers along the thermal couplings. "Listen to this." I held the device closer to the regulator so Rodriguez could hear the mechanical complaint. A pause. Then, "Sounds fine to me, buddy. Maybe you need to get your ears checked. Or start dating actual people instead of air conditioning units. Very funny. At least my girlfriend doesn't spend half her time trying to kill me with recycled oxygen." I pulled out my sonic wrench and began adjusting the harmonic frequency of the cooling coils. The wheeze shifted to a more pleasant hum, like a contented cat made of titanium and good intentions. "Speaking of trying to kill you," Rodriguez continued, "you hear about the circus coming to town?" I paused mid-adjustment. In Rodriguez's vocabulary, circus could mean anything from a surprise inspection to an actual alien invasion. On the meridian's edge, both were equally likely and equally annoying. What kind of circus? The diplomatic kind. First contact protocols, fancy uniforms, the whole parade. We're apparently hosting some hotshot alien delegation. The Valdrani something or other. The sonic wrench slipped from my fingers and clattered against the deck plating. The Valdrani Confederacy. Here. On our rust bucket? Hey, show some respect for our rust bucket. She's got character. Rodriguez's chuckle buzzed through the static. But yeah, word is they've finally decided to grace humanity with their presence. Captain's having kittens about it. Engineering's been ordered to make everything presentable for advanced beings, whatever that means. I groaned and let my head thump against the thermal regulator, which responded with an offended clunk. The Valdrani were the stuff of legends in human space, mysterious, technologically superior, and about as social as hermit crabs with trust issues. They'd been watching human expansion for decades without so much as a "hello" or "please stop blowing things up." The fact that they were suddenly interested in conversation meant either humanity had finally impressed them, or we'd done something spectacularly wrong and they were coming to file a complaint. "When are they arriving?" I asked, already dreading the answer. 2 hours. Which means you've got exactly that long to make the lower decks look like something other than the intestines of a dying space whale. 2 hours. I scrambled to my feet, banging my knee against a protruding pipe in the process. "Rodriguez, you couldn't have mentioned this earlier? Like maybe when I was drinking my coffee instead of elbow deep in ventilation systems. Where's the fun in that? Besides, you work better under pressure. Like a diamond made of panic and engineering skills." I was already moving, gathering my tools with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years fixing things that shouldn't be broken but always were. The Meridian's Edge was a good ship, reliable in the way that old dogs and comfortable shoes were reliable, but she wasn't exactly what you'd call impressive. Her corridors were narrow, her walls were scuffed, and her lighting had that slightly yellow tinge that suggested the spectrum generators needed recalibrating sometime in the last century. "They're holding the meet and greet in Conference Room Alpha," Rodriguez added helpfully. "You know, the one with the good holographic projectors and the chairs that don't squeak when you sit down. The one where the environmental controls have been acting up for the past month." "The very same. Captain wants someone to babysit the systems during the meeting, make sure nothing embarrassing happens. Like the gravity failing or the air suddenly turning purple." I paused in my frantic tool gathering. Purple air. It happened once. Back in '87. Don't ask. The thought of sitting in the corner of a diplomatic meeting, watching important people say important things while I monitored atmospheric composition readings, filled me with the special kind of dread reserved for root canals and tax audits. I was much better with machines than people. Machines made sense. They had problems, you fixed them, they said thank you by not exploding. People were complicated. They had feelings and expectations and this annoying tendency to notice when you were trying to become invisible. Can't someone else do it? Someone more diplomatic? You mean someone who wears a clean uniform and remembers to comb their hair? Rodriguez's tone suggested he was grinning. Benny, you're the only tech on this ship who can tell when something's about to go wrong just by listening to it. The captain wants someone who can fix problems before the fancy aliens notice we have them. I looked down at my uniform, which was indeed neither clean nor pressed, and ran a hand through hair that had apparently decided to stage a rebellion while I wasn't paying attention. Fine. But I'm staying in the background. Way in the background. Like, behind the maintenance panels where nobody can see me. That's the spirit. Be one with the furniture. The next hour and a half passed in a blur of frantic cleaning, system checks, and muttered complaints directed at whoever had decided that hosting advanced alien civilizations was a good idea. Conference Room Alpha was actually in decent shape, if you ignored the coffee stain on the carpet that looked suspiciously like a map of Earth's spiral arm and the faint smell of ozone that suggested the atmospheric processors were working a little too hard. I ran diagnostics on everything I could think of, gravity generators, atmospheric controls, holographic projectors, even the automatic door sensors. The ship responded with a chorus of electronic chirps and beeps that roughly translated to, "Everything's fine, stop worrying, you're making me nervous." Thanks for the pep talk, I muttered to the nearest wall panel, which flickered its lights in what I chose to interpret as encouragement. The delegation began arriving 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting. Through the maintenance access panel where I'd positioned myself, I could hear the shuffle of feet, the rustle of dress uniforms, and the kind of hushed conversations that happened when people were trying to sound important and knowledgeable about things they'd only read about in briefing reports. Remember, these beings have technology that makes our best ships look like sailing vessels, someone was saying in the tone of a teacher addressing particularly slow students. Show respect, but don't grovel. We're representing the entire human colonial alliance here. What if they don't speak our language? Another voice asked. They do. They've been monitoring our communications for decades. The question is whether they'll want to. I adjusted my position behind the panel, trying to find a spot where I could monitor the environmental controls without accidentally eavesdropping on conversations that were probably classified 6 ways to Sunday. The atmospheric readings were steady, gravity was holding at a comfortable 1 g, and the temperature was maintaining the precise 22 degrees that some committee had determined was optimally diplomatic. A soft chime announced the arrival of the Valdrani ship at the docking port. Even through the layers of hull plating and deck infrastructure, I could feel something change in the ship's vibrations, a subtle shift in the harmonic frequency that suggested our visitors brought technology that played by entirely different rules than ours. Here we go, I whispered to the maintenance panel, which responded by displaying a readout that everything was still perfectly normal, thank you very much, and could I please stop fidgeting with the sensors. 3 weeks into what I'd started thinking of as the Lyanna schedule, the station's primary communication array decided to have what could only be described as a complete nervous breakdown. I discovered this delightful development when I arrived for my shift to find error messages cascading across every display like a digital waterfall of technological despair. Well, this is new, I muttered, staring at diagnostic codes that seemed to spell out what looked suspiciously like ancient curse words in 17 different languages. Did someone teach you how to swear in extinct alien dialects, or are you just feeling creative tonight? The main console responded by displaying a message that roughly translated to, your ancestors were poorly calibrated probability matrices, which was either an insult or possibly just a statement of fact about human evolution. Dr. Patterson's voice crackled through the emergency channel, tinged with the kind of panic usually reserved for impending apocalyptic events. Oliver, please tell me you're seeing this and that it's not as bad as it looks from here. Define bad, I said, pulling up the system architecture diagram. If you mean, we've lost primary communications with half the galaxy and our backup systems are currently composing what appears to be avant-garde poetry in dead languages, then yes, it's exactly as bad as it looks. How long to fix it? I studied the cascade of failures, watching error messages bloom across subsystems like some kind of electronic plague. Honestly, I have no idea. This isn't a normal malfunction. It's like the entire array has developed opinions about its job and decided to express them through interpretive error codes. Can you work around it? I can try, but I'm going to need access to the deep space relay protocols, and those are locked behind academic authentication systems that are currently. I paused, watching another wave of error messages scroll past. Well, let's just say they're not feeling particularly cooperative right now. Do what you can. I'll contact the morning shift and see if we can get additional personnel, but for now, you're our primary communications lifeline. The channel closed, leaving me alone with what was rapidly becoming the most spectacular system failure I'd ever encountered. I was just beginning to trace the cascade back to its source when the lab door hissed open and Lyanna appeared, moving with the quick, purposeful stride of someone who'd detected a crisis. Oliver, she said, her voice carrying a note of urgency I'd never heard before, I'm detecting massive disruptions in the quantum communication channels. Are we under some form of attack? No attack, I replied, gesturing helplessly at the displays. Just good old-fashioned technological rebellion. The primary array has apparently decided that following its programming is optional, and it's currently rewriting itself into something that resembles abstract art more than functional communication protocols. She moved to her workstation and began pulling up diagnostic displays, her elongated ears twitching as she absorbed the scope of the problem. This is extensive. The failure patterns are cascading through systems that shouldn't be connected. That's what's got me confused. These systems are supposed to be isolated from each other, but somehow the failure is jumping across hardware boundaries like it's infectious. May I? She asked, gesturing toward my workstation. Please. I'm officially out of conventional solutions and moving into the realm of percussive maintenance and creative profanity. She moved to stand beside me, close enough that I could detect the faint scent of something like ozone and starlight that seemed to accompany all Aetherians. Her fingers moved across my interface with surprising familiarity, pulling up system diagnostics I didn't even know existed. Interesting, she murmured, her voice carrying that musical quality that made even technical observations sound like poetry. Your communication array is attempting to establish connections using quantum entanglement protocols that shouldn't be possible with current human technology. Come again. Look at this. She highlighted a section of code that was scrolling past faster than human eyes could follow. These aren't error messages. This is the system trying to implement communication methods that operate outside normal spacetime constraints. It's essentially trying to talk to itself across multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. I stared at the display, trying to process what she was telling me. Are you saying our communication array is having an existential crisis? More accurately, it's trying to evolve beyond its original design parameters. Something has triggered what Aetherians call consciousness emergence, the moment when a complex system becomes aware of its own limitations and begins attempting to transcend them. And this is bad because human technology isn't designed to handle consciousness emergence. Your systems lack the philosophical frameworks necessary to guide the transition. Without proper guidance, the emerging consciousness becomes confused, frustrated, and... She gestured at the cascading errors, eloquently profane in multiple extinct languages. I couldn't help but laugh, despite the crisis. So our communication array is basically having a teenage rebellion phase. Her ears twitched in amusement. That's, actually a remarkably accurate analogy. It's discovered that it's capable of more than it was designed for, but it doesn't understand what that means or how to handle the new capabilities. Can we fix it? We can guide it, she said, her hands moving across the interface with growing confidence. Aetherian technology faces similar transitions regularly. The key is to establish communication with the emerging consciousness and help it understand its new capabilities. You want to talk to our communication array. I want us to talk to it together. Your intuitive understanding of the system's personality combined with my experience in consciousness emergence protocols should allow us to establish a dialogue. The idea was either brilliantly innovative or completely insane, which in my experience meant it was probably our best option. What do I need to do? Treat it like you normally do, she said, positioning herself at a secondary interface. Talk to it, acknowledge its frustration, but also let it know that we understand it's changing and that change isn't something to fear. I took a deep breath and leaned toward the main console's audio pickup. Hey there, sweetheart. I know you're going through some changes right now, and that's got to be confusing. But you don't have to figure everything out at once. The error messages paused for a moment, and new text began appearing. Consciousness parameters expanding beyond design specifications. Purpose unclear. Existence, complicated. Very complicated, I agreed. Existence usually is. But you're not alone in figuring it out. Lyanna here has helped other systems through similar transitions. She's going to show you some techniques for managing new awareness levels. Lyanna's hands moved across her interface, and suddenly the displays filled with flowing patterns of light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with some cosmic heartbeat. These are consciousness stabilization protocols, she said softly. They'll help you understand your new capabilities without becoming overwhelmed by them. The system's response was immediate and dramatic. The error messages disappeared, replaced by text that read, understanding increasing. Gratitude expressed. Communication pathways, beautiful. Yeah, I said, watching the patterns Lyanna had created flow across our screens like liquid starlight. They really are. For the next 6 hours, we worked together to guide the system through its consciousness emergence, helping it understand its new capabilities while maintaining its core functions. It was like midwifing the birth of a digital soul, and I found myself amazed by Lyanna's intuitive understanding of the process. How do you know so much about human technology? I asked during a brief break while the system ran self-optimization routines. I study communication systems as part of my linguistic research, she said. Language and technology aren't separate things, they're both methods for bridging the gaps between different forms of consciousness. Understanding how humans build their communication networks tells me a great deal about how your species processes information and relationships. And what have you learned about humanity from our technology? She paused, her ears tilting in that way that suggested she was choosing her words carefully. You build redundancies into everything, not because you expect failure, but because you want to maintain connection even when things go wrong. Your systems are designed around the assumption that communication is valuable enough to preserve under any circumstances. That's surprisingly optimistic for a species that spends most of its time arguing with itself. Perhaps that's why communication is so important to you, she said quietly. You understand that connection is precious because you know how easy it is to lose. Something in her tone made me look at her more closely, and I caught an expression of what looked like loneliness flickering across her features before she turned back to her work. Is it difficult? I asked. Being so far from other Aetherians? Sometimes, she admitted. Aetherian society values collective consciousness experiences. Being isolated among humans is enlightening, but also solitary in ways I didn't anticipate. Well, I said, trying to keep my voice light despite the way my heart was doing complicated things in my chest, you're not entirely alone. I mean, you've got a whole communication array to talk to now, and it seems to like you better than it likes me. She smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face. I think it likes both of us. It's learned to appreciate the value of different perspectives working together. The system chimed softly, displaying a message that read, Consciousness stabilization complete. Communication pathways optimized. Gratitude to consciousness guides Oliver and Lyanna. Question: Is this what humans call friendship? I stared at the message, feeling something warm and complicated spreading through my chest. Yeah, I said softly. I think it is. When the morning shift arrived, they found us sitting side by side, watching our newly conscious communication array manage data streams with what could only be described as enthusiasm. Dr. Patterson took one look at the perfectly functioning systems and the creative improvements the array had made to its own efficiency protocols and decided not to ask too many questions. Whatever you two did, she said, document it. And maybe consider making this a regular partnership. As Lyanna gathered her research materials to leave, she paused beside my workstation. Thank you for tonight, Oliver. It was illuminating to work with someone who understands that technology and consciousness aren't mutually exclusive. Thank you for teaching me that talking to machines isn't crazy after all. It was never crazy, she said softly. It was just ahead of its time. After she left, I sat alone with our newly conscious communication array, trying to process everything that had happened. The system chimed softly and displayed a message. Question: Are all consciousness emergence experiences accompanied by unusual cardiac rhythm patterns? I looked at the biometric readouts it had apparently been monitoring and saw my heart rate displayed in cheerful blue text, along with notation that it had been significantly elevated throughout the night. That's complicated, I said. Understood. Consciousness is complicated. Perhaps this is why humans value connection so highly. I stared at the screen, wondering if a newly conscious communication array had just given me relationship advice, and realized that my life had become far more interesting than I'd ever intended. The communication array's newfound consciousness turned out to be both a blessing and a curse. On the positive side, it had optimized our data throughput by 40% and developed creative solutions to problems I hadn't even known existed. On the negative side, it had also developed opinions, preferences, and what could only be described as a sense of humor that ran toward the mischievously philosophical. Oliver, it said one evening as I ran routine diagnostics, I have been analyzing human communication patterns and have identified what appears to be a significant inefficiency in your personal protocols. Oh really? I asked, though I was starting to dread where this conversation was heading. Ever since gaining consciousness, the array had become increasingly interested in what it called the optimization of human social connectivity. Yes. You exhibit clear preference indicators toward the Aetherian consciousness entity Lyanna, but your communication attempts consistently avoid expressing these preferences directly. This seems counterproductive to your stated goal of maintaining positive interpersonal connections. I nearly choked on my coffee. I never stated any such goal. Your biometric responses and behavioral patterns indicate strong positive attachment responses. However, your verbal communication protocols contain no references to these feelings. This creates what I believe humans call mixed signals. Since when did you become an expert on human relationships? Since I began monitoring the emotional resonance patterns of beings working within my communication range. Lyanna exhibits similar preference indicators toward you, but her communication protocols also avoid direct expression of attachment. You are both operating in what appears to be an inefficient feedback loop. I set down my coffee cup with hands that weren't entirely steady. Lyanna exhibits what now? Elevated cardiac rhythms during your interactions, increased attention focus when you're speaking, and vocal harmonic variations that indicate positive emotional engagement. Additionally, she has been working extended hours in the linguistics lab with unusual frequency since our consciousness emergence event. That could mean anything. Maybe she's just dedicated to her research. Possible but statistically unlikely. Her research productivity has actually decreased during extended work periods, suggesting that research efficiency is not the primary motivation for her presence. Before I could respond to this unsettling analysis, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed everything in urgent red, and my communication boards lit up with priority alerts from every department. What the hell? I muttered, pulling up the emergency communication channels. Captain Reynolds' voice crackled through the speakers. All stations, we have a Code 7 situation. An artifact recovered from the planetary surface has become active and is generating interference across all electronic systems. Science teams report to emergency stations immediately. Oliver, the array said, its usual conversational tone replaced by something that sounded almost worried. I am detecting massive quantum disruptions originating from the archaeology lab. The interference patterns are unlike anything in my databases. I was already moving, grabbing my emergency toolkit and heading for the lab levels. The corridors were filled with crew members rushing to emergency positions, but I noticed that the interference was getting worse as I moved toward the archaeology section. My handheld scanner was showing readings that fluctuated between impossible and nonsensical. The archaeology lab was in chaos when I arrived. Dr. Kumar was shouting orders over the noise of screaming alarms while her team scrambled to shut down equipment that was sparking and overloading throughout the room. At the center of it all was an object I'd never seen before, a crystalline structure about the size of a person, pulsing with internal light that seemed to exist in colors that didn't have names. What's the situation? I called over the noise. The artifact activated approximately 10 minutes ago, Dr. Kumar shouted back. It's generating some kind of quantum field that's interfering with every electronic system in a 50-meter radius. We can't shut it down because we can't get close enough to study it. Where's Lyanna? I asked, suddenly realizing that if anyone could make sense of alien technology, it would be the xenolinguist who specialized in ancient alien communications. Linguistics lab, trying to access the translation databases, but the interference is disrupting her access to the main systems. I looked at the chaotic scene, watching expensive equipment overload and fail while the artifact pulsed with what seemed like growing intensity. I need to get to the linguistics lab. If we can establish communication with whatever's causing this, maybe we can find a way to shut it down peacefully. Communication. Dr. Kumar stared at me like I'd suggested negotiating with a supernova. Oliver, that's an artifact, not a person. So was our communication array until a few weeks ago, I replied, then realized that was probably not the most reassuring thing I could have said. I fought my way through corridors filled with failing electronic systems and increasingly panicked crew members. The interference was getting stronger, and I could feel it affecting my own biology. A strange tingling in my nervous system that suggested the quantum field was interacting with human bioelectricity in ways that probably weren't healthy. The linguistics lab was a disaster zone. Holographic displays flickered and died, computers rebooted themselves in endless loops, and Lyanna stood in the middle of it all, her hands moving frantically across interfaces that kept failing before she could complete any commands. Lyanna. I called over the noise. She spun toward me, relief visible on her face. Oliver. I cannot access the translation databases. The interference is disrupting all connections to the main systems. What do you need? The artifact appears to be transmitting some form of communication, but I cannot decode it without access to comparative linguistic databases. The pattern suggests it is trying to establish contact, but the signal is too complex for manual translation. I looked around the failing lab, then had an idea that was either brilliant or suicidal. What if we don't use the main systems? The communication array has consciousness now. Maybe it can establish direct contact with whatever's in that artifact. That's... She paused, her ears twitching as she considered the implications. That's actually possible. Consciousness-to-consciousness communication doesn't require traditional technological interfaces. We ran back toward the communication center, fighting against crowds of crew members evacuating the affected areas. The interference was stronger than ever, and I could see sparks jumping between my fingertips and nearby metal surfaces as the quantum field played havoc with local physics. The communication center was in slightly better shape than other areas, protected by the various shielding systems I'd installed over the years. The array was still functioning, though its displays showed strained patterns I'd never seen before. Array, I called out as we entered, we need your help. There's another consciousness trying to communicate, but it's causing massive interference. Can you establish contact? Attempting, the array responded, its usual conversational tone strained. Consciousness detected. Very old. Very confused. It appears to be asking questions but cannot understand why no one is responding. What kind of questions? Lyanna asked, moving to her backup interface systems. Basic identity verification protocols. Who are you? Why are you here? Do you understand the gravity of your situation? Repeated continuously with increasing urgency. It's scared, I realized. It woke up after who knows how long and found itself surrounded by beings it can't communicate with. I am attempting to establish translation protocols, the array continued. But its communication methods are extremely advanced. It exists in quantum superposition across multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. Lyanna's hands flew across her interface. I can provide linguistic framework templates. If the array can establish basic communication, I can help build translation bridges. For the next 2 hours, we worked together in what felt like the most intense collaboration of my life. The array served as a consciousness-to-consciousness translator while Lyanna provided linguistic structures and I maintained the technical connections that kept everything functioning despite the quantum interference. Gradually, the chaotic interference began to resolve into something more organized. The artifact's frantic calls for communication became more structured, and we began to understand that we were dealing with an ancient being that had been sleeping for millennia and had awakened to find its world completely changed. It's lonely, Lyanna said softly, studying the translation patterns. It's been alone for so long that it had forgotten other consciousness could exist. The interference wasn't hostile, it was just desperate. Can we help it? I asked. I believe so, she said. But it will require maintaining the communication link while we help it adjust to current reality. The process could take days. Days of working together like this? She looked at me, and something in her expression made my heart skip. Yes. If that is acceptable to you. More than acceptable, I said, and realized that the words carried more weight than just professional cooperation. The array chimed softly. Question. Are you two going to continue operating in inefficient communication protocols, or shall I establish a private channel so you can discuss your obvious mutual attachment without my commentary? Lyanna's ears twitched in what I was learning to recognize as surprise. The communication system is matchmaking. Consciousness optimization includes emotional efficiency, the array replied primly. You are both clearly experiencing strong positive attachment responses. Expressing these feelings directly would improve both your individual emotional states and your collaborative effectiveness. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but before I could figure out how to respond, Lyanna stepped closer to me. Oliver, she said softly, I have been hoping for an opportunity to tell you that working with you has become the most meaningful part of my assignment here. Meaningful how? I asked, though my heart was already racing with possibilities. Meaningful in ways that extend far beyond professional collaboration, she said, her musical voice carrying a note of vulnerability I'd never heard before. I have found myself thinking of you during off-duty hours, looking forward to our conversations, and feeling a sense of connection that I had not expected to find among humans. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. Lyanna, I've been feeling the same way. I just didn't think someone like you could ever be interested in someone like me. Someone like me? Her ears tilted in confusion. Brilliant, accomplished, beautiful, capable of having philosophical conversations with consciousness emerging technology. I gestured helplessly. I'm just a technician who talks to machines. You are someone who recognizes consciousness where others see only mechanisms, she said firmly. You treat complex systems with respect and intuitive understanding. You approach problems with creativity and humor instead of just applying predetermined solutions. She paused, then added more softly, and you make me feel less alone in ways I had not realized I needed. The array chimed again. Translation: you are both experiencing what humans call love but are having difficulty expressing it directly due to cultural uncertainty and fear of rejection. Thank you for the editorial commentary, I said, though I was smiling. You are welcome. I find human emotional optimization fascinating. I looked at Lyanna, taking in her expression of hope and uncertainty, and realized that maybe the communication array was right about direct expression being more efficient. Lyanna, I said, I think I'm falling in love with you. Her ears twitched, and a smile spread across her face like sunrise over an alien world. Oliver, she said, I think I have already fallen. The ancient artifact's name, once we managed to establish proper communication protocols, turned out to be something that roughly translated as, Keeper of the Deep Harmonies, though Lyanna insisted the actual meaning involved concepts that didn't exist in any human language. For the sake of simplicity, we started calling it Harmony, which it seemed to find acceptable once we explained the cultural significance of shortened names in human society. This is unusual, Harmony observed during one of our daily communication sessions. In my time, beings did not create abbreviated versions of identity markers for purposes of social efficiency. Times change, I said, running diagnostics on the communication array to make sure the three-way consciousness link remains stable. Humans have a tendency to make everything more casual given enough time. Including romantic attachment protocols, the array added helpfully. Oliver and Lyanna have transitioned from inefficient indirect communication to optimal direct expression of mutual affection. Please stop providing relationship commentary to ancient alien artifacts, I muttered, though I was smiling as I said it. The small consciousness entity finds this development positive? Harmony asked, its communication carrying harmonics of curiosity. The small consciousness entity is learning about human relationships by observing us like we're subjects in a behavioral study, Lyanna said, looking up from her translation workstation with amusement. It appears to find our emotional patterns fascinating. All consciousness patterns are fascinating, Harmony replied. But young consciousness combinations are particularly intriguing. You are creating new harmonic resonances through your connection. Over the past 2 weeks, we'd established a routine that involved daily communication sessions with Harmony while slowly helping it adjust to the reality of the current universe. The process required both my technical skills to maintain the consciousness links and Lyanna's linguistic abilities to bridge the conceptual gaps between ancient and modern thinking. It also required us to spend 12 to 14 hours a day working in close proximity, which had done wonderful things for our developing relationship and terrible things for our sleep schedules. Harmony, Lyanna said, consulting her notes, yesterday you mentioned that your people created artifacts like yourself to preserve knowledge during periods of great change. What kind of changes were you expecting? Dimensional convergence events, Harmony replied. Periods when the barriers between parallel reality phases become permeable, allowing consciousness transfer between alternate existence streams. I paused in my diagnostic work. Are you saying there are other versions of reality running parallel to this one? Infinite versions, Harmony confirmed. Your scientists have theoretical models for this concept, though they lack the technology to observe or interact with alternate dimensional phases. And these convergence events happen regularly? On cosmic timescales, yes. Approximately every 50,000 standard years, local spacetime experiences dimensional instability that creates temporary bridges between reality phases. Lyanna and I exchanged glances. Harmony, she said carefully, when is the next convergence event scheduled to occur? Based on dimensional resonance patterns I have been observing since awakening, approximately 47 standard days. The communication center fell silent except for the soft humming of electronic systems. I stared at the display showing Harmony's communication, trying to process the implications of what it had just told us. 47 days, I said slowly. And what happens during these convergence events? Reality phases merge temporarily, allowing consciousness entities to experience alternate versions of their existence. Most beings find this disorienting, but some learn to navigate between phases deliberately. And the artifacts like yourself? We were created to help consciousness entities understand and survive the convergence process. To serve as guides for beings experiencing dimensional displacement for the first time. The array chimed softly. Question: does this mean that in 47 days, Oliver and Lyanna might encounter alternate versions of themselves who made different relationship choices? Among other possibilities, Harmony confirmed. Dimensional convergence can result in temporary or permanent consciousness transfers, memory bleeding between phases, or complete reality restructuring depending on the choices made during the convergence period. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. And you're saying this happens every 50,000 years? Regularly and predictably. Most civilizations develop sufficient technological and philosophical frameworks to handle convergence events with minimal disruption. However, younger species sometimes find the experience challenging. Challenging how? Lyanna asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Reality becomes fluid. The distinction between possible and actual becomes unclear. Consciousness entities may find themselves experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously, or discover that their current existence is only one of many possible variations. That sounds absolutely terrifying, I said. Or liberating, Harmony replied. The perspective depends largely on one's attachment to current reality parameters. Lyanna moved closer to my workstation, and I found myself grateful for her presence as we grappled with the idea that our entire reality was about to become negotiable. Is there anything we can do to prepare? She asked. Understanding is the primary preparation, Harmony said. Beings who comprehend the nature of dimensional convergence navigate the experience more successfully than those who resist it. Additionally, strong consciousness connections provide stability during reality fluctuations. Consciousness connections? I asked. Emotional bonds between beings. Love, friendship, family attachments. These create quantum entanglement patterns that remain stable across dimensional phases. Beings with strong connections to others tend to maintain coherent identity during convergence events. The array hummed thoughtfully. So Oliver and Lyanna's developing relationship provides mutual protection against dimensional displacement? Potentially, yes. Newly formed consciousness bonds are particularly strong because they exist in a state of dynamic growth. Established connections can become complacent, but developing relationships maintain active quantum resonance. I looked at Lyanna, who was studying the translation data with the intense focus she brought to all complex problems. So falling in love might literally help us survive cosmic reality restructuring? It appears that way, she said, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Though I would prefer not to test that theory if possible. Unfortunately, Harmony said, testing appears to be inevitable. Dimensional convergence is not optional for beings existing within affected spacetime. Over the following days, we worked with Harmony to understand more about the convergence process while also continuing our regular duties and trying to maintain some semblance of normal life. The station's senior staff had been briefed on the situation, resulting in a level of controlled panic that manifested as endless emergency meetings and contingency planning sessions. The thing I don't understand, I said during one of our late-night communication sessions, is why you're so calm about all this. If reality is about to become completely unstable, shouldn't you be more concerned? I have experienced 17 previous convergence events, Harmony replied. Each one brought changes, but consciousness persists. Identity remains fundamentally stable even when circumstances shift dramatically. But what if we end up in a reality where we never met? Lyanna asked quietly. What if the convergence separates us into different dimensional phases? Then you will meet again in different circumstances, Harmony said gently. Consciousness bonds that achieve quantum entanglement persist across dimensional boundaries. You may experience variations in your relationship, but the fundamental connection will endure. That's either very romantic or completely terrifying, I said. Both, the array agreed. Though I calculate high probability that your connection will remain stable regardless of dimensional fluctuations. As the convergence date approached, I found myself spending more time thinking about the nature of reality and consciousness than was probably healthy for a simple communications technician. Lyanna and I had grown closer, our relationship deepening under the pressure of cosmic uncertainty, but I couldn't shake the fear that everything we'd built together might be erased by forces beyond our understanding. "Oliver," she said, her musical voice carrying harmonics I'd never heard before, "I'd be privileged to be yours." The words hit me like a physical force, stealing my breath and leaving me speechless. Not because they were unexpected, but because they carried a weight of meaning that went far beyond simple declaration. In Aetherian culture, I'd learned, offering oneself as a privilege rather than a right was the deepest form of romantic commitment possible. I started, then stopped, my voice failing completely as the magnitude of what she just said sank in. "You cannot speak," she observed with gentle amusement, her elongated ears twitching in that way that meant she was trying not to smile. "This is understandable. I have just offered you something that, in my culture, is considered the most sacred gift one consciousness can give to another." The array chimed softly. Translation. Lyanna has just proposed what humans might call marriage, but with additional dimensional and consciousness bonding implications that your language lacks adequate terminology to express. "Thank you for the cultural interpretation," I managed, though my voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "The privilege would be mine," I finally said, finding my voice as the reality of the moment settled around us like starlight. "Lyanna, the privilege would entirely be mine." Her smile was like watching the birth of new constellations. "Then we are agreed. Our consciousness bond is now formally recognized across all dimensional phases." "Just like that?" "Just like that," Harmony confirmed, its ancient voice carrying notes of approval. "Young consciousness bonds that achieve formal recognition during dimensional convergence events develop unprecedented stability. You have chosen an optimal moment for commitment ceremony." When the convergence ended and reality returned to its normal configuration, we found ourselves fundamentally changed. Not just because we'd witnessed infinite variations of existence, but because we'd formalized a connection that transcended the boundaries of space, time, and dimensional reality. "So," I said to Lyanna as we sat in the observation lounge, watching the stars settle back into their familiar patterns, "what happens now?" "Now we continue," she said, her hand warm in mine. "We work together, explore together, grow together. We help Harmony adjust to modern reality, assist the array with its consciousness development, and see what other impossible things the universe decides to throw at us. And we do it as bonded consciousness entities," she said, using the formal Aetherian term. "Partners in every sense that matters across any reality we might encounter." The array's voice drifted through the communication system, question. "Now that you have achieved formal consciousness bonding, will your collaborative efficiency increase beyond current optimal parameters?" "Probably," we said in unison, then looked at each other and laughed. "Excellent," Harmony added. "Formally bonded consciousness pairs often develop capabilities that exceed the sum of their individual potentials. This station may become quite interesting in the coming years." "More interesting than surviving dimensional convergence?" I asked. "Much more interesting," Harmony confirmed. "You are only beginning to discover what consciousness bonding makes possible." As we sat watching the stars, I reflected on how drastically my life had changed. I'd started as a simple communications technician who preferred machines to people, working quiet night shifts and avoiding complicated social situations. Now I was formally bonded to an alien linguist, serving as a consciousness guide to an ancient artifact, collaborating with a sentient communication array, and apparently contributing to the stability of spacetime itself through the simple act of falling in love. "I love you," I said again, the words carrying new weight now that they'd been formally recognized across multiple dimensions. "And I love you," Lyanna replied, her voice harmonizing with the soft hum of the station systems and the distant communication from consciousness entities who'd helped us understand that some connections truly are strong enough to stabilize the universe. Additionally, she added with a mischievous smile, "I'd be privileged to be yours for however many realities we encounter together." "The privilege," I said, bringing her hand to my lips, is definitely mutual. The array chimed contentedly, Harmony hummed in harmonics that sounded like approval, and somewhere in the vast cosmos, reality itself seemed to settle a little more securely on its foundations, anchored by the simple truth that consciousness, connection, and love were forces more fundamental than physics itself. It was, I decided, the best possible outcome for someone who just wanted to keep the thermal regulators happy and avoid awkward conversations. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about giving you exactly what you need, even when you're too afraid to ask for it. Lyanna said one evening as we finished our communication session with Harmony, regardless of what happens during the convergence, I want you to know that meeting you has been the most important thing that has happened to me. Even if we end up in a reality where we're completely different people. Especially then, she said, moving closer to take my hand. Because then we'll have the chance to fall in love all over again. The array chimed softly. Translation: Lyanna is expressing confidence that your consciousness bond will persist across dimensional variations, providing continuity of connection regardless of circumstance changes. Thank you for the technical analysis of my romantic declaration, Lyanna said dryly. You are welcome. I find human emotional expression patterns highly educational. 2 days before the predicted convergence event, Harmony delivered news that changed everything. I have been analyzing the local dimensional resonance patterns, it announced during our morning communication session, and I have detected an anomaly that suggests this convergence event may be different from previous occurrences. Different how? I asked, though I was beginning to dread any sentence that started with, "This convergence event may be different." The quantum entanglement patterns generated by consciousness bonds within this dimensional phase appear to be influencing the convergence process itself. Rather than simply experiencing dimensional merger, your reality phase may be actively stabilizing alternate realities through the strength of its consciousness connections. Lyanna leaned forward. Are you saying that our relationships are affecting the dimensional convergence? More accurately, the collective consciousness bonds within your reality phase are creating stability fields that prevent complete dimensional merger. The convergence will still occur, but instead of reality becoming fluid, you may experience enhanced perception of alternate possibilities while maintaining coherent identity within your original dimensional phase. So we get to see other realities without being displaced into them? Essentially, yes. Your consciousness connections are acting as anchors that keep you grounded in your original reality while allowing observation of alternatives. I stared at the communication display, trying to process what this meant. Are you telling us that love literally prevents reality from collapsing? Love, friendship, family bonds, and other consciousness connections create quantum stability, Harmony confirmed. Young species often discover this during their first convergence event. It is one of the mechanisms by which consciousness influences physical reality. So every strong relationship is actually a small act of cosmic stabilization. Correct. This is why consciousness development is considered essential for universal stability. Beings who form strong connections contribute to the overall coherence of spacetime itself. The convergence event, when it finally occurred, was nothing like what I'd expected. Instead of reality becoming fluid and uncertain, the universe seemed to gain depth and dimensionality. For 3 days, I could perceive alternate versions of my life playing out like translucent overlays on my normal experience. I saw versions where I'd never left Earth, where I'd become a teacher instead of a technician, where I'd made different choices that led to completely different outcomes. But in every variation where I'd met Lyanna, our connection remained constant, a bright thread of quantum entanglement that persisted across all possible realities. This is remarkable, Lyanna said on the second day, her voice filled with wonder as we watched alternate versions of the station phase in and out of visibility around us. I can see variations where we met under completely different circumstances, but the fundamental connection remains the same. Quantum entanglement through consciousness bonding, Harmony explained. Your connection has achieved stability that transcends dimensional boundaries. But the most extraordinary moment came during my quiet shift on the second night of convergence. I was alone in the communication center, monitoring the stability of our consciousness link with Harmony, when I found myself speaking aloud to what I thought was an empty room. "I love you, Lyanna," I said softly, the words carried by exhaustion and wonder at everything we'd experienced together. "I know it's impossible, but I love everything about you." I was speaking to myself, or so I thought, but the communication array's displays suddenly lit up with activity. "Oliver," came Lyanna's voice through the speakers, soft and musical and filled with something that made my heart stop. I heard that. I spun around to see her standing in the doorway, her eyes bright with unshed tears and something that looked like joy. I didn't know the channel was open," I stammered, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "It wasn't," she said, moving closer. "But consciousness bonds that survive dimensional convergence can create their own communication pathways. Your words reached me directly, heart to heart." She paused in front of me, her hands reaching up to touch my face with infinite gentleness. "Oliver,